Good morning. I want to answer a question as best I can. This is a difficult question, but I understand where it comes from, and it's an important one. It deals with good and evil, but the specific nature of the question, and I'll kind of summarize. It was framed as a little bit of a longer question sent to me, but the question goes like this: why create the tree of knowledge of good and evil in the first place and place it in the garden if failure leads to suffering? So in other words, if God knows, which he did, God knew that Adam and Eve would fail in regard to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would partake of that fruit, and thus thrust all humanity into a fallen realm where suffering exists, then why create it in the first place? And we can ask this question in a lot of different forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be tagged to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, although it certainly isn't an inappropriate question to be tagged to that. We can just ask, why not create creatures that would automatically love the Lord? Why let failure even be an option, whether it's tagged directly to the tree here or not? Why let humanity sin or fall into sin? Why allow evil to exist at all? And in some ways, this gets to the ground of what is in some ways one of the hardest questions of all, because we wrestle with the existential nature of evil. And we've talked about this a little bit in some previous thoughts for the week, but it's worth making a couple of key points in response to this very important question. So let me make a few points that might contribute to some help in getting toward an answer here. So the first thing is, I think we need to understand that the price of relationship, by its intrinsic nature, entails a being with a volition, with the capacity to make a choice. Now, freedom comes in different ways. I mean, there's total freedom, like a libertarian sense. There's a compatibilist sense where you have freedom within certain fences. But at the very least, it entails a creature with volition. And I do think that Adam and Eve were created with a kind of more libertarian type freedom that then got siloed into a freedom that has fences because of the fall. But nonetheless, even within the eternal Trinity, there is volition. There's clearly the Son, the Father, and the Spirit as Trinity are communicating with one another. They're relating to one another. Therefore, there's a volitional aspect to each of the persons. And so in some way, the very nature of a relationship demands that there's the capacity to make choices. Now, the Trinity always makes choices in concert with the pristine, eternal, magnificent, pure, holy character that it possesses, that the persons possess. Adam and Eve, created with the potential, in a libertarian sense it seems, to choose evil, had to have volition, had to have a will for it to be a genuine relationship. So in some ways, the opportunity for evil is just simply the nature of having a finite creature, not necessarily a sinful creature, but a finite creature created such that it has a volition. The same could be true of Lucifer himself, who fell prior to the fall of humans. And so in that way, evil has its origin in the potentiality of the finitude of Satan himself as a volitional angelic being. Secondly, evil itself does have a purpose, and that is that we wouldn't, like in a similar way, I wouldn't really understand the nature of light if not contrasted with dark, true if not contrasted with false. There's this privative nature where I'm not sure I'm going to understand what good fully is unless I understand what evil is. And so evil itself is a pointer to the good. I recently went to Auschwitz and we made our way through and got about as close as you can get to the absolute pitch black darkness of human evil. And this is what resides in human hearts, right? It's not so much we see those things and we say, man, that treatment is inhumane. No, it's actually very human. because there's deep evil in human hearts. And so as we're going through Auschwitz and we walk our way at the end of Auschwitz 1 before we go to Auschwitz 2, which is also known as Birkenau, we made our way down into a bunker, and it was the old gas chamber where Jews were first, their bodies were cremated, but then later they were placed in there alive and brought to death through the gas chamber as chemicals were dropped from the roof down into that concrete bunkered chamber. That's heinous evil. That's heinous evil. The opposite of evil is complete, eternal, unmitigated goodness. And so in some way, the presence of evil actually elucidates the nature of what is purely good in that way. God's light shines in and shines brighter in that sense in darkness. Proverbs 8:13 reads, "The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance in the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate." Because God is pure light, he is contrasted with evil, and the presence of evil itself in that way actually elucidates the light and even magnifies it. God himself, as a third point, we should note, even though evil and suffering exist, God does not delight in evil, where we read in Psalm 5:4, "For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you." A fourth piece that we should note is that we also learn, because of the presence of evil that was allowed in humanity in that Genesis account, at the participation of the creatures in partaking of the knowledge of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The presence of that also made way for something, and that is, it makes way for an aspect of the character of God to be put on display, namely the gift-giving nature of God, the benevolence of God, the love of God, because his grace gets put on display. This gift-giving to finite creatures who need grace. Even without sin, we need grace. And Dallas Willard pointed that out, because we're finite. But all the more because the presence of evil abounds in the world. And so grace itself, fourthly, showing up, gives radiance to the glory and to the majesty of God. And I want to note one final thing, a fifth thing that I would just note, is that in the midst of that suffering, it doesn't mean that suffering has the final say. And I say that because one of the things we should note practically is that God, who is infinite and eternal, God, who is omniscient, now, even in regard to his creation, he has an infinite capacity in an eternal or everlasting time, if I can say that, moving forward, to show the utility of evil ultimately in bringing glory to himself. Now, how he goes about that, how he does that, I get seeds of when I read the text of Scripture about the new creation. I get seeds of when I see how God's glory is put on display in his justice. I get seeds of how it's put on display in the redemption of creation. But I don't see fully how it all manifests itself. But I do know that he has an infinite capacity for the utility of evil, even in a fallen world, because the fallen world isn't the end world. Instead, there is a redeemed world where all things are made new and right. So, I don't know that that's a fully satisfying answer, but it moves us a direction towards understanding why God permits failure in the first place. And I do want to make one other comment, and that is that we have to be careful that we don't assume that pain and even suffering is in some ways always bad. And here's what I mean when I say that. Pain itself isn't a direct result of the fall. Before the fall, would Adam have said, ouch, if he pricked his finger on a thorn? And the answer, it seems to me, is of course, yes. Because the nature of being a finite creature is that you have limitations. Wouldn't Adam, in his sense perception, have been able to feel what it is to grip something too firmly? How would he have known how to grab something? Wouldn't he have implicitly known and sensed pressure and therefore pain? So it's why when the curse falls on woman, it says that her pain will increase in childbirth. It seems to presuppose that there would have been pain even in the context of perfection, because pain by its nature is actually a wonderful tool for finite human creatures. If you doubt this, read a little bit about leprosy, Hansen's disease, and what happens to people's bodies when they can't sense pain. They don't know that when they put their hand on a hot burner that it's burning. They don't know that their shoe is rubbing wrong. They don't know when they grab the mop handle that they're wearing away something by the way they grip it. Pain is actually a gift to tell us how to handle ourselves as finite creatures. That's a side note, but sometimes we can see pain as sort of the enemy when pain is not. Pain's part of finitude before it's anything to do with a fallen world. Okay. Well, I hope that helps you and think through this in a little bit more clear way, or maybe a deeper way. May the Lord bless you, and may you take care this week.